See for yourself. Marcus Thorne, 412 Chestnut Drive.
I'm gonna need to see some identification. Driver's license. Now.
Officer, why? Am I being detained for something?
You're being detained for investigation of mail theft. Give me your ID or I'm adding resisting arrest of the charges.
The early morning light on Sterling Avenue had a quality all its own. A soft, golden hue that filtered through the towering glass and steel canyons of downtown Los Angeles. It was a light that promised new beginnings, a fresh start with every sunrise. For Javier Morales, this light was the signal to begin his daily ritual. At precisely 5:30 a.m., his modest, gleamingly clean coffee cart would claim its usual spot on the corner of Sterling and 8th, a small island of warmth and aroma in the vast, waking city. The cart wasn't just a business. It was a testament to a quiet, unwavering dedication. Every stainless steel surface was polished to a mirror shine, every container was perfectly aligned, and the rich, invigorating scent of freshly ground Colombian coffee beans was his morning's first offering to the world. Javier, a man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a network of fine lines that spoke more of smiles than frowns, moved with an economy of motion born from years of practice. He was a craftsman, and coffee was his medium. He didn't just pour brown liquid into a cup, he orchestrated a symphony of scent and flavor. The hiss of the steam wand, the rhythmic thump of the portafilter being cleared, the gentle gurgle of the drip coffee maker, these were the sounds that scored the city's overture. He had started this cart 7 years ago with his meager savings after the contracting company he'd worked for as a supervisor unexpectedly restructured him out of a job. It was a brutal blow, but Javier wasn't a man to be defeated. He poured his pride, his resilience, and his last few dollars into this mobile enterprise, determined to build something of his own, something no one could take away from him. His setup was humble but impeccable. A large, commercial-grade dispenser held his signature dark roast, a brew so popular that people would often say it could wake the dead. Next to it sat a smaller dispenser of a milder breakfast blend, alongside insulated carafes of hot water for tea. He had a small but powerful espresso machine, a source of immense pride, which he kept so clean it looked brand new. His beans were sourced from a local roaster who gave him a fair price, a man who respected Javier's passion. Everything had its place. The neat stacks of cups, the organized rows of lids, the little containers of raw sugar, cinnamon, and chocolate powder. This wasn't just a coffee stand, it was Javier's kingdom, a 4-by-6-foot patch of sidewalk where he was the master of his own destiny. The first customers began to arrive just after 6. They were the city's early risers, construction workers in heavy boots, their faces still etched with sleep, nurses in scrubs, their expressions weary from a long night shift or bracing for the one to come, security guards ending their lonely vigils. They didn't come just for the coffee. They came for Javier. They came for the quiet nod of recognition, the gentle, "How are you this morning, Maria?" or the simple, "The usual, David?" He remembered their names, their orders, and little details about their lives. He knew that David's son was starting college and that Maria's mother was feeling better after a recent illness. He was more than a vendor. He was a fixture, a stable, reassuring presence in their chaotic lives. His cart was a place where, for a few minutes, they could feel seen and acknowledged. This morning was no different. The air was crisp with a hint of coolness, a rare treat in the LA basin. The line was steady, a mix of regulars and new faces drawn in by the irresistible aroma. A burly construction foreman named Mike was first, as always. "Mornin', Javi," he grunted, placing a crumpled $5 bill on the counter. "Gimme the rocket fuel. Got a long one today." Javier smiled, his hands already moving, grabbing a large cup and filling it with the dark roast. "For you, Mike, always the strongest," he said, his voice warm and slightly accented. He passed the cup over, his calloused fingers briefly touching Mike's. "Have a good day. Stay safe up there." Mike nodded, taking a deep sip. "You too, man, you too." The transaction was simple, familiar, and deeply human. It was a small exchange of currency and caffeine, but also of mutual respect. This was the rhythm of Sterling Avenue, the gentle pulse of a community built one cup of coffee at a time. Little did anyone know, this familiar rhythm was about to be violently interrupted, and the quiet dignity of Javier's world was about to be put on trial in the harshest court of all, the court of public opinion. The line at Javier's cart grew as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that stretched across the sidewalk. The initial wave of early workers gave way to the 9-to-5ers, the office crowd in their tailored suits and sharp business attire. The atmosphere was a low hum of pleasant conversation and the quiet tapping of smartphones. It was a cross-section of the city, a place where different worlds intersected for a brief, caffeinated moment. A young graphic designer with neon pink hair stood behind a stoic-looking lawyer in a pinstripe suit, both waiting patiently, united by their common need for a morning boost. Javier navigated the rush with his usual unflappable grace, a calm center in the swirling vortex of urban life. "A large latte with oat milk for Sarah," he called out, placing the cup on the counter with a steady hand. A young woman looked up from her phone and smiled. "Thanks, Javier, you're a lifesaver." She dropped a couple of dollars into his tip jar, which was already starting to fill up. The jar had a handwritten sign taped to it, "For my daughter's college fund." It was a small, personal touch that reminded everyone that behind the counter was a man with a family, with dreams and aspirations just like their own. He wasn't an anonymous service worker. He was Javier, and his daughter Sophia was a real person they were helping, one tip at a time. A woman named Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly lady who lived in a nearby apartment building, approached the counter. She had been coming to Javier's cart every morning for the past 3 years, ever since her husband passed away. "Good morning, Javier, dear," she said, her voice a little frail. "Just a small black coffee for me today." Javier paused what he was doing and gave her his full attention. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable. It is a beautiful morning, no?" He prepared her coffee exactly as she liked it, not too full to prevent spills from her slightly trembling hands. He refused to take her money, as he often did. "It is on the house today," he insisted gently. She protested weakly, but he just smiled. "It is my pleasure. Now you have a wonderful day." This small act of kindness was witnessed by several people in line. No one said anything, but nods of approval were exchanged. This was the man they supported every day, a man of quiet decency. The line moved efficiently. Javier was a master of his craft, anticipating orders, working the espresso machine while making change, and always, always with a polite word for everyone. He treated the CEO in the $1,000 suit with the same respect as the bike messenger in sweat-stained spandex. To him, they were all just people who wanted a good cup of coffee. This inherent fairness, this simple, democratic approach to service, was the bedrock of his business. He believed in a simple code. You work hard, you are kind to people, and you take pride in what you do. It was a philosophy that had served him well, earning him not just customers, but a loyal following. Among the regulars was a young man named Ben, a paralegal who worked in one of the adjacent office towers. He was a tech enthusiast and always had the latest gadget. Today, he was showing off his new smartphone to another customer, marveling at the quality of its 4K camera. "The detail is just insane," he was saying, idly filming the steam rising from the coffee dispenser. He panned across the street, capturing the morning traffic, the pedestrians, the vibrant life of the city. He wasn't filming anything in particular, just testing his new toy, creating a meaningless, high-definition digital record of an ordinary morning. It was a mundane act, the kind of thing people do every day without a second thought. But in a few moments, that innocuous piece of footage would become anything but meaningless. It would become evidence. It would become a weapon. It would become the catalyst that would change multiple lives forever. The atmosphere remained calm, a fragile bubble of civility and routine. But the sharp, aggressive sound of a sports car engine revving far too loudly for a city street was beginning to cut through the morning calm, signaling that the bubble was about to burst. The sound was a violation, a screech of tires, and an arrogant roar that tore through the peaceful morning hum. A pearl-white Maserati Levante, a vehicle that cost more than Javier's entire business, cut across 2 lanes of traffic and screeched to a halt in a red-painted commercial loading zone. The car idled for a moment, its engine a low, guttural growl, as if daring someone to challenge its presence. The people in line at the coffee cart instinctively turned, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. This wasn't just parking, it was a statement of privilege, an announcement that the rules of ordinary people did not apply. The driver's side door swung open, and a woman emerged. Her name was Caroline Jennings. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in what could only be described as aggressively expensive athleisure wear, black leggings that shimmered with a subtle designer logo, and a matching jacket that likely cost more than a week's worth of Javier's earnings. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect ponytail, and oversized black designer sunglasses concealed her eyes, making her expression unreadable but exuding an air of detached superiority. She slammed the car door without a backward glance and began striding toward the sidewalk, the sharp, percussive clicks of her heels on the pavement sounding like tiny, angry gunshots. She didn't just walk, she marched, her movements clipped and impatient, as if the very act of putting one foot in front of the other was a monumental waste of her valuable time. She completely ignored the line of waiting customers, the unspoken social contract of queuing meaning nothing to her. She moved with the unthinking entitlement of someone who had never been told no, someone who saw other people not as individuals, but as obstacles in her path. Her destination was the front of the line, and she cut through the small crowd with the determination of a predator moving through a herd. A few people muttered under their breath. A young man opened his mouth to say something but then seemed to think better of it, intimidated by the sheer force of her dismissive aura. Caroline arrived at the counter, planting herself directly in front of Javier, who was in the middle of handing a mocha to the pink-haired graphic designer. She didn't say, "Excuse me." She didn't acknowledge the other customer. She simply stood there, radiating a palpable field of irritation. Javier, ever the professional, finished his transaction with the designer, giving her a polite smile before turning his attention to Caroline. "Good morning," he said, his tone even and welcoming. "How can I help you?" Caroline slowly pushed her sunglasses up onto her head, revealing a pair of cold, blue eyes and a face set in a mask of profound annoyance. She surveyed his humble cart, the gleaming steel, the neat stacks of cups, the handwritten sign for his daughter's college fund, with a look of undisguised contempt. Her lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disgust that was impossible to miss. "I need a black coffee, large," she snapped, her voice sharp and devoid of any pleasantries. She was already pulling a credit card from a slim, expensive wallet, clearly expecting instantaneous service. Javier gestured politely toward the end of the line, where 6 other people were still waiting. "Of course," he said calmly. "I will be happy to get that for you. The line just starts back there." It was a simple, reasonable request, the kind he made a dozen times a day. He wasn't being difficult. He was being fair to everyone else. It was the principle upon which his small business, and indeed a functioning society, was built. But Caroline Jennings did not operate on principles of fairness. She operated on principles of power and privilege. The suggestion that she should wait, that she was no more important than the other people standing on the sidewalk, was not just an inconvenience to her. It was a deep, personal insult. The temperature on the corner of Sterling and 8th seemed to drop by several degrees. The hurricane had made landfall. The change in Caroline's demeanor was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of bored annoyance shattered, replaced by a visage of pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly manicured features twisted into an ugly sneer. "Are you kidding me?" she spat, her voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I don't have time to wait in line with all of this." She made a sweeping, dismissive gesture with her hand, encompassing the diverse group of customers, the cart, the entire street scene, as if it were all just garbage cluttering her personal runway. Javier's calm expression didn't waver, but a tension settled in his shoulders. He had dealt with rude customers before, but this felt different. This was venomous. "I understand you are in a hurry," he said, his voice still steady, a beacon of reason in her rising storm. "But these people have also been waiting. It will only be a few minutes." His appeal to fairness was like throwing a lit match into a puddle of gasoline. "A few minutes?" she shrieked, her voice now gratingly loud. "I don't pay a fortune to live in this city to have my morning ruined by this filth!" She gestured directly at his cart. "This kind of thing just brings the whole neighborhood down. It's disgusting." The word disgusting hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The people in line exchanged shocked and uncomfortable glances. The lawyer in the pinstripe suit looked aghast. Ben, the paralegal, who had been about to put his phone away, instinctively raised it again, his finger hovering over the record button. Something told him this was escalating beyond a simple case of a rude customer. Javier's jaw tightened. This was an attack not just on his business, but on his dignity, his very presence. Still, he clung to his professionalism. "Ma'am, I am just trying to do my job," he said, his voice low but firm. "If you do not want to wait, that is your choice, but I will not serve you ahead of my other customers." He then made the decision to turn away from her, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He turned to the next person in line, an older man in a tweed jacket. "Sir, what can I get for you today?" This act of dismissal, of being treated as just another person, was the final trigger for Caroline. With a guttural sound of fury, she lunged forward. She didn't go for Javier, she went for the coffee. The older man, who had just paid for his cup, was holding it in his hand. In a flash of movement, Caroline snatched the cup from his grasp. The man let out a startled cry of, "Hey!" Before anyone could process what was happening, she pivoted. With a flick of her wrist, she flung the entire contents of the large, steaming cup, not at Javier's face, but downwards, a calculated act of degradation. The scalding hot coffee splashed across the front of Javier's simple white apron and cascaded down onto his worn leather shoes, soaking his socks and trousers in an instant. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The air was thick with the smell of wasted coffee and the even more acrid stench of pure malice. Javier flinched back, a sharp hiss of pain escaping his lips as the heat seeped through the fabric. Dark brown liquid dripped from the hem of his apron onto the sidewalk, forming a spreading, ugly stain. For a moment, there was absolute stunned silence. The city's ambient noise seemed to fade into nothingness. All that existed was the shocked faces of the onlookers, the spreading puddle on the ground, and the two figures at the center of the drama. Javier stood there, his hands slightly raised, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. His shoes were ruined, his pants were soaked, and a painful reddening patch was already beginning to form on his skin through his sock. And Caroline? She stood there, the empty paper cup still in her hand, her chest heaving, a look of cold, cruel satisfaction on her face. She had made her point. She had put the lowly street vendor back in his place. The silence that followed the assault was heavy and suffocating. It was broken by Caroline. She dropped the now empty paper cup onto the stained sidewalk as if it were a piece of trash. "Clean that up," she commanded, her voice dripping with venom. She turned her back on Javier, on the stunned crowd, on the mess she had created, and prepared to walk away, a conqueror leaving a vanquished foe. In her mind, the encounter was over. She had asserted her dominance and was now ready to proceed with her important day, this minor annoyance now firmly in her rearview mirror. She believed she could act with such impunity that her actions would have no repercussions beyond the immediate, satisfying humiliation of a man she deemed beneath her. But she had fundamentally misjudged the world she was living in. This wasn't a private altercation in a secluded alleyway. This was a public square in the 21st century, a world saturated with technology, where every citizen was a potential documentarian. As she took her first triumphant step away from the scene, a voice, clear and steady, cut through the air. "It's all on camera." The voice belonged to Ben, the young paralegal. His initial instinct to record had taken over. The moment Caroline had snatched the cup, his finger had pressed the button. His new phone, with its state-of-the-art 4K sensor and image stabilization, hadn't missed a single detail. It had captured her sneering face, the lunge, the snatching of the cup, the deliberate malicious flick of her wrist, the splash of the hot coffee, and the pained flinch from Javier. It had recorded it all in crystal-clear, irrefutable high definition. Caroline froze mid-stride. Her shoulders went rigid. Slowly, she turned her head, her sunglasses failing to hide the sudden flicker of uncertainty that crossed her features. She saw Ben, standing less than 10 feet away, his phone held up and pointed directly at her. His expression was not angry or aggressive. It was calm, almost detached, the look of someone simply documenting a fact. "Every second of it," he added, his voice firm, "including the part where you threw hot coffee on." Suddenly, the dynamic shifted. The power Caroline wielded through her wealth and status began to evaporate under the cold, unblinking gaze of a single camera lens. For the first time, a crack appeared in her armor of entitlement. The other people in line, previously frozen in shock, were now stirring, murmuring amongst themselves. Another phone came out, then another. The silent witnesses were transforming into a network of citizen journalists. The lawyer in the pinstripe suit stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think you should stay right here," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound authority. "What you just did constitutes assault and battery." Caroline's head snapped toward him, her mouth opening to deliver a scathing retort, but the words died in her throat. Her eyes darted around, and for the first time she seemed to truly see the crowd, not as faceless obstacles, but as individual witnesses, their faces a mixture of disgust and condemnation. The reality of her situation began to dawn on her. This wasn't just an argument she had won. This was a crime she had committed, on camera, in front of a dozen people, including a lawyer. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her rage. Her carefully constructed world of control was tilting on its axis. She turned and began to walk away again, but this time her stride was not a confident march, but a brisk, panicked retreat. "I'm calling the police," the lawyer announced to her retreating back, his own phone now in his hand. Caroline didn't look back. She fumbled in her pocket for her car keys, her movements suddenly clumsy and frantic. She reached her Maserati, her hands shaking as she tried to unlock the door. The satisfying click of her heels was now the sound of a desperate escape. She threw herself into the driver's seat, revved the engine with a furious roar, and sped away, leaving behind a puddle of cooling coffee, a silent, hurting man, and a high-definition digital record of her disgrace that was about to find an audience of millions. Ben stood on the sidewalk for a moment, his phone still in his hand, the recording saved. His heart was pounding. He looked at Javier, who was now quietly trying to blot his soaked pants with a rag, his face a mixture of pain and profound humiliation. He looked at the other witnesses, who were consoling the older man whose coffee had been stolen and assuring Javier they would all give statements to the police. A sense of cold, righteous anger settled in Ben's stomach. This wasn't right. What Caroline had done was more than just rude, it was dehumanizing. And she was just driving away, back to her privileged life, thinking she could get away with it. He knew what he had to do. It took him less than 5 minutes. He uploaded the 4K video file to his social media accounts, Twitter, Instagram, and a local community forum on Reddit. He didn't add any dramatic commentary. The video spoke for itself. He simply wrote a short, factual caption. "This morning on Sterling and 8th, a hard-working vendor named Javier was assaulted by this woman for simply asking her to wait in line. She threw hot coffee on him. Let's find out who she is." He included the date, the time, and the location. Then he hit post. The internet, as it so often does, did the rest. The first few reactions were from his immediate circle of friends, expressing shock and disgust. But the video was too compelling, too raw, too perfectly archetypal to stay contained. It was a perfect storm of viral content, a clear aggressor, a sympathetic victim, an act of shocking entitlement, and high-quality footage that left no room for ambiguity. Someone on Twitter with a few thousand followers retweeted it. Then a local news blogger saw it. From there, it jumped the digital fence from a personal post to a public event. Within the first hour, the video had 10,000 views. By lunchtime, it had surpassed 1 million. The hashtag Coffee Cart Caroline was born, a spontaneous creation from the churning depths of the internet, and it began to trend with astonishing speed. People weren't just watching the video, they were dissecting it. They slowed it down. They took screenshots of Caroline's face. They enhanced the image to get a clearer look. The clarity of the 4K footage was her undoing. Every sneer, every flicker of contempt was preserved in perfect detail. The comment sections became a global courtroom. The absolute arrogance! I hope she gets found and fired. That poor man, he handled it with so much grace. My heart breaks for him. This is what privilege looks like, folks. The rules don't apply to her. The outrage was palpable and nearly universal. People from all walks of life, from different countries and different political spectrums, were united in their condemnation of her actions. She had managed to become a universally reviled figure in the space of a single afternoon. News outlets began to pick up the story. First, it was the local LA blogs, then the city's major news channels, and by late afternoon, it was being discussed on national news websites. The video was played on a loop, Caroline's angry face now broadcast to the entire country. She was no longer an anonymous woman in a luxury SUV, she was Coffee Cart Caroline, a new inductee into the internet's Hall of Shame, a living symbol of entitled rage. The digital wildfire was out of control, and it was burning straight towards the carefully constructed facade of her life, threatening to consume everything she had built. She had wanted to humiliate one man in a moment of anger. Instead, the unblinking eye of a stranger's camera had ensured her own humiliation would be global, permanent, and absolute. The internet's collective fury, once ignited, is a formidable investigative force. While the mainstream news was still referring to her as an unidentified woman, the online communities of Reddit, Twitter, and various forums had already launched a full-scale digital manhunt. For these anonymous sleuths, it was a puzzle to be solved, and the 4K video Ben had shot provided all the necessary clues. They weren't just watching a video, they were analyzing forensic data. The first breakthrough came from the car. Someone recognized the custom pearl white paint and the specific aftermarket rims on the Maserati. A user on a car enthusiast forum cross-referenced it with photos from a recent luxury auto show in Southern California. It wasn't a positive ID, but it was a lead. The bigger clue, however, was a fleeting detail that only high-definition footage could capture. As Caroline fumbled for her keys to make her escape, a leather portfolio on the passenger seat was briefly visible. For a split second, a corporate logo embossed in gold foil caught the sunlight. A user on Reddit managed to grab a screenshot. The image was slightly blurry, but the distinctive design was there. They posted the screenshot to the main thread discussing the incident. Anyone recognize this logo? The question was an open challenge. Within 30 minutes, the answer came back. Viridian Dynamics. It's a high-powered consulting firm. Headquarters is 3 blocks from Sterling and 8th. The hive mind had its first major breakthrough. The digital trail was now hot. The next step was to connect the woman to the company. The sleuths turned their attention back to Caroline herself. Her designer sunglasses, her unique, expensive-looking ring, her severe ponytail. It was a distinctive look. They began scouring the employee profiles on the Viridian Dynamics website and its corresponding LinkedIn pages. They scrolled through dozens of headshots of corporate executives, VPs, and senior managers. And then they found her. Caroline Jennings, Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts. The professional, smiling headshot on her LinkedIn profile was undeniably the same woman from the video, minus the enraged sneer. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The unmasking was complete. Her full name, her job title, and her employer were now public knowledge. The information spread from the forums back to Twitter, attached to the original video and the hashtag CoffeeCartCaroline. The digital mob now had a name and a target. People began flooding the social media pages of Viridian Dynamics with links to the video, demanding action. "Is this the kind of person you have in senior leadership?" one user tweeted at the company's official account. "Your SVP of Strategic Accounts, Caroline Jennings, assaults small business owners in her spare time. Great look for the brand." Caroline, who had likely spent the day hoping the incident would just blow over, was about to discover that there is no hiding from a viral video. Her phone, which she had probably silenced, would have been exploding with notifications. Her work email inbox was undoubtedly filling with messages ranging from concerned colleagues to outright threats from anonymous strangers. She had built her identity around her career, her title, her position of power at a prestigious firm. It was the source of her wealth, her status, and her crushing sense of entitlement. And now, the very people she disdained, the anonymous online masses, were using the tools of the digital age to dismantle that identity, piece by painful piece. Her professional life, the bedrock of her entire existence, was now directly in the line of fire. The digital assault on Viridian Dynamics was swift and merciless. By late afternoon, the company's name was trending alongside #CoffeeCartCaroline. Their meticulously curated corporate image, one of professionalism, integrity, and forward-thinking leadership, was being irrevocably tarnished by the actions of one of their top executives. The phones at their corporate headquarters were ringing off the hook with calls from angry citizens and inquisitive journalists. Their social media channels, usually a bland stream of press releases and industry articles, had become a raging dumpster fire of public condemnation. For the C-suite at Viridian, this was no longer an employee's personal problem. It was a full-blown, five-alarm public relations crisis. An emergency meeting was convened in the top-floor boardroom, a sterile, glass-walled space that suddenly felt like a bunker under siege. The CEO, the head of HR, the chief legal counsel, and the entire communications team were present, their faces grim as they watched the video on a massive screen. They saw their senior vice president, a woman they paid a handsome six-figure salary, behaving like a monster. The 4K clarity left no room for excuses or alternative interpretations. Her actions were indefensible. The discussion was not about whether Caroline was in the wrong, that was painfully obvious. The discussion was about damage control. The legal counsel warned of potential liability. Could the company be sued? Was her behavior indicative of a toxic corporate culture? The communications team spoke in panicked tones about brand damage, about losing clients, about the stock price taking a hit when the markets opened. The consensus was reached with brutal corporate efficiency. Caroline Jennings was no longer an asset. She was a liability of catastrophic proportions, and she had to be cut loose. While they deliberated, Caroline herself was likely in a state of meltdown. She would have seen her name and face plastered across the internet. She would have understood, with dawning horror, the magnitude of what was happening. She probably tried to call her boss, the CEO, only to be sent straight to voicemail. She was being isolated, prepared for corporate execution. There would be no loyalty, no support. In the cold calculus of corporate survival, her years of service and the profits she had generated for the company meant nothing compared to the immediate threat she now posed to its reputation. At 7 p.m. that evening, the official statement was released. It was posted on Viridian Dynamics' website and across all their social media platforms. The text was a masterpiece of carefully crafted corporate speak, vetted by a team of lawyers to be as legally airtight as possible. It read, "Viridian Dynamics has been made aware of a deeply disturbing video circulating online involving one of our employees. The behavior displayed in this video is in direct violation of our company's core values of respect, integrity, and community. We have a zero-tolerance policy for such conduct. After a swift internal review, we have terminated the employment of the individual involved, effective immediately. We want to be clear. These actions do not represent who we are as a company. We are committed to being a responsible and positive member of the communities we serve." The statement was cold, clinical, and absolute. There was no mention of Caroline by name, but everyone knew who the individual involved was. With a few calculated sentences, a multi-billion-dollar corporation had publicly disowned her, throwing her to the wolves to save itself. The internet cheered. Justice, in its swift, digital form, had been served. Caroline Jennings, the senior vice president, was gone. In her place was just Caroline Jennings, the unemployed woman from the viral video, stripped of her title, her power, and the corporate shield that had for so long protected her. She had lost her job not because she was a bad person, but because her bad behavior had become a liability. It was a brutal, but in the eyes of the public, entirely fitting end to her day of rage. The morning after Caroline's digital downfall, the scene on the corner of Sterling and 8th was transformed. The usual quiet, orderly line at Javier's cart was gone. In its place was a massive crowd, a line that snaked down the block and around the corner, filled with hundreds of people. They weren't just the usual office workers and construction crews. They were people from all over the city. Students, retirees, artists, tourists, people who had never been to this part of town before but had been moved by the video and felt compelled to do something. They had come to make a statement of their own, a counter-protest against the hatred and entitlement they had witnessed online. Javier arrived at his usual time, expecting a normal day, perhaps a few new faces who had seen the news. He was completely unprepared for the scene that greeted him. He stopped in his tracks, his heart swelling with a mixture of shock and overwhelming gratitude. As he approached his cart, the crowd broke into spontaneous applause. People cheered, they called out his name, they held up signs that read, "We stand with Javier," and "Kindness is not filth." Javier, a man of quiet reserve, was visibly moved. His eyes welled up with tears, and he put a hand to his chest, simply nodding his thanks, too choked up to speak. The day was a blur of activity. People didn't just buy one coffee, they bought 5, telling him to give the others to someone who needs it. They stuffed 20s, 50s, and even $100 bills into his tip jar, which had to be emptied multiple times into a cardboard box he kept under the counter. A young woman handed him an envelope. Inside was a gift card to a high-end shoe store with a note that said, "For the shoes she ruined." A local bakery owner arrived with boxes of free pastries for Javier to give away to his customers. It was a tidal wave of human decency, a powerful and public refutation of Caroline's hateful actions. Meanwhile, the GoFundMe campaign that Ben had started the previous day with a modest goal of $500 to cover Javier's lost income and damaged shoes had taken on a life of its own. Fueled by the viral video, donations were pouring in from across the country, from all over the world. By mid-morning, it had surpassed $10,000. By the end of the day, it was climbing past $50,000. The comments on the page were a testament to the story's impact. From Ohio, sending support. Your grace under pressure is an inspiration. I'm a fellow small business owner in the UK. What she did was disgusting. This is for you. This donation is from my family. Thank you for showing our kids what dignity looks like. News vans had returned to the scene, but this time they were there to capture the incredible outpouring of support. They interviewed Javier, who, with his characteristic humility, tried to deflect the attention. "I am just a man trying to work," he told a reporter, his voice thick with emotion. "I did nothing special. The kindness of these people is the real story. I don't know how to say thank you." He spoke about his daughter Sophia and how this money would guarantee her college education, a dream he had worked tirelessly for. What Caroline had intended as an act of public humiliation had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. She had tried to make Javier feel small, to erase him. Instead, she had made him famous. She had tried to destroy a piece of his livelihood. Instead, she had inadvertently made him financially secure. The community, both local and digital, had not just repaired the damage she had caused, they had built something far bigger and more beautiful in its place. It was a powerful lesson. One act of hatred can be loud, but 1,000 acts of kindness can be louder. And on this day, on Sterling Avenue, the sound of kindness was deafening. Amid the joyful chaos of the supportive crowd and the constant flash of news cameras, a woman in a sharply tailored navy blue suit moved through the throng with a quiet, focused determination. She wasn't there for a photo op or to buy a cup of coffee. She waited patiently, observing the scene, her intelligent eyes taking in every detail. When there was a brief lull in the line, she approached the counter. She looked to be in her early 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and an aura of sharp intellect. "Mr. Morales?" she asked, her voice clear and professional, cutting through the ambient noise. Javier, who was busy trying to keep up with the endless stream of orders, looked up. "Yes, that is me," he replied, expecting another well-wisher. "My name is Eliza Reed," the woman said, extending a hand and a business card. "I'm an attorney with the firm Reed and Associates." Javier wiped his hand on his apron and shook hers, a look of confusion on his face. "A lawyer? If this is about what happened yesterday, the police already took my statement. I do not think I want to sue. It is over." He was overwhelmed and just wanted to move on, to get back to his normal life. Eliza Reed gave a small, understanding smile. "I'm not an ambulance chaser, Mr. Morales, and I'm not here about the coffee." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I'm here about Viridian Dynamics." The name hit Javier like a punch to the gut. The joyful energy he'd been feeling all morning drained away, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. His smile faded, and the weary lines around his eyes deepened. Viridian Dynamics was a ghost from his past, a source of a deep and lingering injustice that predated the coffee cart and Caroline Jennings. I do not understand," he stammered. "What does that have to do with you?" Eliza's eyes were steady and serious. "I know who you are, Mr. Morales. I mean, I knew who you were before you became the most famous coffee vendor in the country. My firm specializes in employment law, specifically wrongful termination and discrimination cases." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I am the lead counsel on a case that was filed 14 months ago, a case that alleges a pattern of racial discrimination and unfair labor practices at Viridian Dynamics. A case that was filed on behalf of a group of former service contractors. A case that you, Javier Morales, are the lead plaintiff and key witness for." Javier stared at her, his mind reeling. The lawsuit. It had been a long, draining, and so far fruitless battle. After he had been fired, he had found other contractors, mostly men and women of color, who had similar stories of being passed over for promotions, being subjected to derogatory comments from managers, and being fired for minor or fabricated infractions. They had pooled their resources to hire a law firm, but the corporate giant had stalled and stonewalled at every turn, burying them in paperwork and motions, trying to bleed them dry until they gave up. Javier had almost lost hope. "The video of Caroline Jennings is everywhere," Eliza continued, her voice intense. "She was, until last night, a senior vice president at the very company we are suing. Her public display of what I would argue is clear racial animus and class prejudice against a person of color isn't just a random act of assault. It's a potential goldmine for our case. It demonstrates the exact culture of arrogant bigotry that you have been claiming exists within their management for over a year." Javier looked at her, then at the long line of supportive faces, then back at Eliza. He had thought yesterday's incident was a singular, ugly moment. He was now beginning to understand that it wasn't an isolated event at all. It was an echo, a public manifestation of the same poison that had cost him his career and led him to this very corner. The spilled coffee was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. The story of Javier Morales and Viridian Dynamics began 2 years before the coffee incident, in the gleaming, soulless corridors of the company's downtown skyscraper. Javier wasn't a street vendor then. He was the head supervisor for a third-party janitorial services company, Prime Clean Solutions, which held the lucrative cleaning contract for the entire Viridian Tower. He had worked his way up from a night cleaner to a position of responsibility, managing a crew of over 30 people. He was respected by his team and known for his meticulous standards. He was proud of his work, ensuring that the pristine, high-tech offices of the consulting firm were immaculate every single morning. His position gave him a unique, ground-level view of the corporate culture. While the official Veridian mission statements plastered on the walls spoke of diversity and inclusion, Javier witnessed a different reality. He saw how his crew, composed almost entirely of Black and Latino workers, was treated by some of the Veridian employees and managers with dismissiveness, condescension, and at times, outright contempt. He heard the jokes and snide comments made in passing, the assumption that the cleaning staff were invisible. The problems escalated when a new facilities manager was appointed by Veridian, a man who became the direct liaison for Javier's contract. This manager consistently denied promotion opportunities to experienced members of Javier's team, instead bringing in less qualified white workers from another contractor. Javier also overheard this manager using racial slurs on more than one occasion when he thought no one of consequence was listening. A man of principle, Javier couldn't stay silent. He began documenting everything: the denied promotions, the dates and times of the derogatory comments, the unfair shift assignments. He followed the proper channels, reporting his concerns first to his own company, Prime Clean, and then directly to Veridian's HR department, providing a detailed written complaint. The response was chillingly predictable. His complaint was met with a wall of corporate denial. Veridian's HR department conducted a thorough investigation which concluded that his claims were unsubstantiated. A week later, Prime Clean Solutions, under pressure from their powerful client, informed Javier that Veridian had requested his removal from the contract. 2 weeks after that, Prime Clean fired him, citing vague performance issues that had never been mentioned before in his 10 years of excellent service. He was 46 years old with a family to support, and he had been systematically pushed out for doing the right thing. This was the injustice that fueled the lawsuit. With Eliza Reed's help, Javier found several other former employees who had been similarly mistreated. Their case argued that Veridian fostered a discriminatory environment and used its power to have whistleblowers fired. But it was a difficult case to prove. It was their word against a mountain of corporate lawyers and carefully worded performance reviews. Veridian's defense was simple. They weren't responsible for the employment decisions of their contractors, and Javier was simply a disgruntled former worker. They had been slowly strangling the lawsuit for over a year. Now, standing at his coffee cart, Javier explained this painful history to Eliza in hushed tones. "They said I was lying," he said, the old anger and frustration resurfacing. "They said there was no proof of a culture of disrespect. They painted me as incompetent." Eliza listened intently, her expression hardening with resolve. "Well, Mr. Morales," she said, pulling out her phone and looking at a screenshot of Caroline's enraged face. "I believe their senior vice president just handed us the proof we'd been looking for. She showed the entire world the ugly, entitled face of Veridian's management. She didn't just throw coffee on a street vendor, she threw it on the key witness in a major discrimination lawsuit against her own company. This is no longer just your word against theirs. It's your word, backed by a 4K video that has been seen by 50 million people." The two separate battles of Javier's life, the fight for his past and the assault on his present, had just merged into one. While Javier was having his life-altering conversation with Eliza Reed, Caroline Jennings was huddled in her now silent, minimalist mansion, living through a nightmare of her own making. The initial shock and panic had given way to a desperate, self-pitying delusion. She had convinced herself that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that she was the real victim. She was the one being harassed online, the one who had lost her job. In her mind, the incident was being blown completely out of proportion. It was just a spilled coffee, a moment of stress. She hadn't really hurt him. Her delusion was shattered when 2 detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department arrived at her door. The public outcry was too massive, and the evidence too clear for the police to ignore. They weren't aggressive, They were professional and detached. They informed her that a formal complaint of assault and vandalism had been filed and that they needed to take her statement. This was the moment Caroline believed she could regain control. She was articulate, intelligent, and used to manipulating situations to her advantage. She invited them inside and began to spin her narrative. "I am so glad you're here, officers," she began, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "It was a terrifying experience. That man, he was incredibly aggressive toward me. I felt threatened, unsafe. I was just trying to get away from him, and in the confusion, the coffee cup was knocked over. It was a complete accident." She painted a picture of herself as a woman alone, intimidated by a hostile man, lashing out in fear. She claimed he had sworn at her, that the crowd had been menacing. She was building a careful fortress of lies, believing her word, the word of a wealthy, successful woman, would outweigh that of a simple street vendor. One of the detectives, a seasoned officer named Miller, listened patiently, his face unreadable. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "Thank you for your statement, Ms. Jennings." He then turned to his partner, who was holding a tablet computer. "Could you play the video for Ms. Jennings?" His partner turned the tablet around. On the screen was Ben's video, queued up and ready to play. It wasn't a grainy, shaky phone clip. It was a high-resolution, perfectly stable 4K video displayed on a bright, clear screen. Miller pressed play. The scene unfolded in excruciating detail. They all watched in silence as Caroline, looking confident and aggressive, cut the line. They heard Javier's polite, calm voice. They saw Caroline's face contort with rage. They heard her venomous words loud and clear. "This filth! Disgusting!" The audio was impeccable. And then they watched the climax. The deliberate snatch of the cup, the calculated downward flick of the wrist, the splash, and Javier's pained reaction. The video showed no aggression from Javier. It showed no menacing crowd. It showed no accidental spill. It showed a clear, unprovoked assault. When the video finished, the room was silent. Caroline stared at the screen, her face ashen. The clarity of the footage was absolute. It left no room for interpretation, no shadows in which her lies could hide. It was the unvarnished, undeniable truth, captured at 60 frames per second. "As you can see, Ms. Jennings," Detective Miller said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy, "your statement does not appear to be consistent with the video evidence. In fact, the evidence suggests you committed an unprovoked assault and then provided a false statement to law enforcement." The fortress of lies crumbled into dust. Caroline's composure shattered completely. She began to stammer, to backtrack, her story changing with every sentence. "Well, maybe I was angry. He was being incredibly disrespectful by making me wait. I didn't mean to hurt him." Her attempts to justify her actions sounded pathetic and hollow, even to her own ears. The truth, captured in millions of tiny pixels, was inescapable. She wasn't the victim, she was the perpetrator, and she had just been caught lying to the police, a crime in itself. The unblinking eye of the camera had not only exposed her public sin, but it also demolished her private defense, leaving her with nothing but the ugly truth. The aftermath of Caroline's disastrous police interview set in motion two parallel legal proceedings, creating a two-front war from which she had no escape. The first front was criminal. Based on the video evidence, the witness statements, and her own self-incriminating contradictory testimony, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office moved swiftly. They formally charged Caroline Jennings with 1 count of misdemeanor assault and 1 count of vandalism. But they also added a crucial and much more serious component, a hate crime enhancement. The DA's argument was that Caroline's actions were not just a random outburst of anger. They were motivated by prejudice. Her specific language, calling Javier's cart filth, and her contemptuous dismissal of him and his customers, was presented as evidence of a bias based on his perceived social class and race. The crime wasn't just throwing coffee, it was the act of a privileged individual using a destructive act to enforce a social hierarchy, to put a minority small business owner in his place. This enhancement significantly raised the stakes. If convicted, she wouldn't just be facing fines or probation, she would be facing potential jail time and a permanent record as someone who committed a hate crime. Her arraignment was a media circus. Hounded by reporters, her face hidden behind sunglasses and the collar of her coat, she pleaded not guilty, a formality her lawyer insisted upon. But both she and her high-priced legal team knew their position was incredibly weak. The prosecution's primary piece of evidence, the viral video, was a prosecutor's dream. It was an unimpeachable witness that couldn't be cross-examined or accused of having a faulty memory. Her legal strategy would be one of mitigation and damage control, not a fight for acquittal. The second front of the war was civil, and in many ways it was even more devastating. Eliza Reed, armed with the now infamous video, filed an emergency motion in the discrimination lawsuit against Viridian Dynamics. Her legal argument was brilliant. She contended that the video was newly discovered evidence that was directly relevant to the case. It wasn't just about Caroline Jennings' personal character, it was about the character of Viridian's leadership. For over a year, Eliza wrote in her motion, the defendant, Viridian Dynamics, has claimed that Mr. Morales' allegations of a discriminatory corporate culture are baseless. They have painted him as a lone, disgruntled employee. We now have irrefutable video evidence of a member of their senior executive team, Ms. Caroline Jennings, engaging in a public act of bigotry and contempt against Mr. Morales. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. Her behavior on the street is a clear reflection of the culture of arrogance and racial bias that Viridian fosters within its own walls and uses to oppress its service workers. The motion sent shockwaves through Viridian's legal department. They had planned to bury Javier's lawsuit in endless paperwork. Now they were faced with the prospect of having the coffee cart Caroline video played in front of a jury during a discrimination trial. The video transformed Javier from an isolated plaintiff into a deeply sympathetic victim, whose claims of mistreatment were now visually, viscerally believable. It gave Eliza the leverage she had been missing for months. The judge granted her motion, ruling that the video was indeed admissible as evidence of a potentially hostile and discriminatory corporate culture. Caroline's single moment of rage had not only destroyed her own career and reputation, but it also provided the key to unlock the case against the corporate giant she once served. She was now being squeezed from both sides, by the criminal justice system for her public actions and by the civil court system, where those same actions threatened to bring down her former employer. The deposition took place in a sterile, soulless conference room at a neutral law firm. It was a key step in the civil lawsuit against Viridian Dynamics. On one side of the long, polished mahogany table sat Caroline Jennings, flanked by a team of stone-faced corporate lawyers from Viridian. Their strategy was to portray her as a rogue employee, an anomaly whose personal failings had no bearing on the company itself. On the other side sat Eliza Reed and Javier Morales, who was present as the plaintiff. Javier was calm and composed, his presence a quiet but powerful testament to the truth of his claims. For the first hour, Viridian's lawyers questioned Javier, trying to pick apart his story, to find inconsistencies, to paint him as unreliable. He answered every question simply and honestly, never wavering. Then it was Eliza Reed's turn to question Caroline. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. Eliza began gently, establishing the facts of Caroline's employment, her role, her seniority. Caroline answered in clipped, robotic tones, coached by her lawyers to say as little as possible. Then, Eliza changed tactics. Jennings, I'd like to talk about the events of October 12th. You encountered Mr. Morales at his place of business, is that correct? Caroline stiffened. I encountered him on a public sidewalk, she corrected, a hint of her old arrogance creeping into her voice. Objection, one of her lawyers sighed. Relevance. It is highly relevant to establishing a pattern of behavior, Eliza countered smoothly. The objection was noted, and Eliza continued. And at that time, you engaged in a verbal and physical altercation with him, correct? There was a misunderstanding, Caroline mumbled. It was an accident. Eliza paused and looked down at her notes. An accident, I see. She then turned to an assistant, who set up a large monitor at the end of the table, facing Caroline directly. I would like to play a piece of evidence for the record. Let's call it Exhibit A. The assistant pressed a button, and Ben's 4K video filled the screen. The sound was turned up, filling the silent room. They all watched. They saw Caroline sneer, heard her say, "Filth." They saw her snatch the cup, the deliberate, angry flick of her wrist, the coffee splashing on Javier. In the sterile quiet of the deposition room, the act seemed even more violent and shocking than it had online. Javier watched the video without flinching, his expression sad but resolute. The Viridian lawyers stared at the table, unable to look at the screen. But Caroline was forced to watch. She had to sit there and see the worst version of herself, captured in perfect detail. Her face went pale, a slight tremor running through her hands. When the video ended, Eliza let the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds before she spoke. "Ms. Jennings," she said, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. "You just testified under oath that the incident was an accident. Does that look like an accident to you?" Caroline stared at the frozen image of her own enraged face on the screen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Does calling a man's livelihood filth sound like a misunderstanding?" Eliza pressed on. "Mr. Morales alleges that while he worked under contract at Viridian, he was subjected to a culture of disrespect and condescension from management because of his race and position. Would you say that your behavior in this video is consistent or inconsistent with that allegation?" One of her lawyers jumped in. "Objection! You're asking her to characterize—" "I'm asking her to tell the truth," Eliza cut him off. She turned back to Caroline, her eyes boring into her. "The truth, Ms. Jennings. You saw Mr. Morales, a man of color running a small business, and you felt entitled to belittle him, to assault him, to treat him as less than human. Isn't that the same entitlement, the same prejudice that permeates the management culture at Viridian Dynamics? The same culture that got Mr. Morales fired for daring to speak up?" Caroline finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I don't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a devastating moment. The video hadn't just proven the assault, it had shattered Caroline's credibility and, by extension, the entire defense strategy of Viridian Dynamics. The showdown was over, and the truth, in glorious 4K, had won. The deposition was the breaking point. For Caroline Jennings and for Viridian Dynamics, the war was effectively over. The video, now officially entered as evidence, had rendered their positions indefensible. What followed was a swift and decisive conclusion on both legal fronts. In the criminal case, Caroline's lawyer saw the writing on the wall. Going to trial would be a public crucifixion. The jury would see the video, they would hear from the lineup of disgusted witnesses, and a conviction would be all but certain. Facing the serious possibility of jail time under the hate crime enhancement, Caroline accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and vandalism. In exchange, the DA dropped the hate crime enhancement, though the judge made it clear he was factoring the hateful nature of the act into his sentencing. Caroline was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service at a homeless shelter, mandatory anger management and racial sensitivity counseling, and was ordered to pay full restitution to Javier for his damaged property and lost wages. She was also issued a restraining order, forbidding her from coming within 500 feet of Javier or his place of business. At her sentencing, she gave a tearful, prepared statement of apology. But for most of the public, it was far too little, far too late. On the civil front, Viridian Dynamics went into full retreat. Eliza Reed's masterful use of the video in the deposition had given them a glimpse of the catastrophic damages a jury could award if the case went to trial. The video had the power to enrage a jury and make them deeply sympathetic to Javier and the other plaintiffs. The company's carefully constructed image would be shredded in open court. Their high-priced lawyers advised the board to cut their losses and contain the fallout. They approached Eliza Reed with a settlement offer. The negotiations were swift. Viridian, desperate to make the entire scandal disappear, agreed to a massive settlement. The amount was confidential, but sources would later leak that it was a multi-million-dollar figure, to be divided among Javier and the other plaintiffs in the class action suit. The settlement also included a public apology from the company, not just for the Caroline Jennings incident, but for the past grievances of their former contractors. They also committed to a complete overhaul of their contractor management and HR complaint procedures, to be overseen by an independent third party. It was a total capitulation, a resounding victory for the little guys. Javier Morales, the man who had been unjustly fired and left to start over with a coffee cart, had not only been vindicated, but had also forced a corporate behemoth to its knees. The cost of Caroline's single moment of entitled rage was staggering. For her, it was her career, her reputation, a criminal record, and public infamy that would follow her for the rest of her life. Every time her name was searched online, the video would be the first result. She had become a permanent caricature of privilege and bigotry. For Viridian Dynamics, the cost was millions of dollars in legal settlements and an indelible stain on their corporate brand that would take years to fade. And for Javier, the outcome was life-changing. The settlement gave him and his family a level of financial security he could have never dreamed of. It was justice, delivered through the most unexpected of means. It all began with a simple act of standing up for himself, an act that was amplified by the lens of a stranger's camera and the righteous anger of a connected world. The system, for once, had worked. The powerful were held accountable, and the humble were lifted up. In the months that followed the legal resolutions, a new kind of quiet settled over the corner of Sterling and 8th. The news vans were long gone, the massive crowds had subsided, and the viral heat had moved on to the next internet inferno. Yet something had fundamentally changed. Javier Morales still arrived every morning at 5:30 a.m. to set up his cart. He still polished the steel, still brewed the same rich, dark roast, and still greeted his customers with a warm, genuine smile. The cart itself was the same, but Javier was different. He stood a little taller, the weary tension in his shoulders replaced by a quiet confidence. His base of regular customers had tripled. People still came from across the city, not for the novelty anymore, but because they genuinely loved his coffee and respected the man who made it. The tip jar for Sophia's college fund was gone, replaced by a small, unassuming charity box for a local food bank. Javier had used a portion of the settlement money to buy a modest house, securing his family's future, and had put the rest away, vowing not to let it change the core of who he was. He had even received offers to franchise his coffee business, to open a chain of Javier's Best. He politely declined. He wasn't interested in building an empire. He just wanted to make good coffee, on his corner, for his community. His victory wasn't in the money. It was in his ability to continue his life's simple ritual, with his dignity not just restored, but reinforced. The incident left a permanent echo. The sidewalk where the coffee had stained the concrete became an unspoken landmark. New customers would sometimes glance down at the spot, a silent acknowledgement of the drama that had unfolded there. The story of Coffee Cart Caroline became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among office workers about the consequences of a bad day. It served as a stark reminder that in the modern city, every public space is a potential stage, and every stranger holds a camera. This awareness seemed to foster a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in behavior. A little more patience in lines, a few more pleases and thank yous. It was a small, fragile piece, born from a moment of profound ugliness. Javier rarely spoke of Caroline or the lawsuit. When asked, he would simply say that he wished her peace and hoped she had learned something. He held no hatred for her. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that her actions came from a place of deep unhappiness, a spiritual void that no amount of money or status could fill. His grace remained his most powerful weapon and his most enduring trait. The corner of Sterling and 8th was once again just a place to get coffee, but it was also something more. It was a monument to resilience, a testament to the fact that sometimes, in the face of ugliness, decency can and does win. What drives a person like Caroline to act with such cruelty over a minor inconvenience? Perhaps it was the immense pressure of her corporate life, a world where every minute is billable and human interaction is reduced to a transaction. Maybe it was a deep-seated insecurity, a desperate need to feel powerful by making others feel small. Her expensive car, her designer clothes, were they symbols of success, or were they armor, hiding a fragile ego terrified of being seen as ordinary? We can analyze it, but we can never truly excuse it. Stress doesn't create a bigot. It merely reveals the bigotry that was already there, lurking beneath a polished surface. Could Javier have done anything differently to protect himself? If he had backed down and served her immediately, he might have avoided the assault. But at what cost to his self-respect and his fairness to others? If he had matched her anger with his own, the situation could have escalated. And in a world skewed by prejudice, a camera capturing an angry brown man yelling at a blonde woman might have told a very different and much more dangerous story. His decision to remain calm and professional was not a sign of weakness. It was an act of immense strength and wisdom. It was the only move that allowed her evil to expose itself fully, without any ambiguity. This story, in the end, is about the collision of modern technology and ancient hatreds. It's a reminder that the camera in your pocket is more than just a tool for selfies. It can be a tool for justice. It forces us to ask ourselves what we would do in that situation. Would we stand by in silence? Or would we have the courage to press record, to bear witness? What do you believe is the right way to respond when you see an injustice happening right in front of you? And do you think the final outcome for everyone involved was truly fair? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in these conversations.